Greetings, humans. This presentation is called Working by Candlelight. And what I'm trying to do is pull out some themes that emerged over uh, over 10 years of clinical supervision, with me being the supervisor. Um, so my supervision was with therapists in China who were coming to existential psychology, but were already trained in and practicing in other therapeutic modalities. So I wasn't teaching them how to do therapy, but the supervision component had to both keep the client safe, as is a function of supervision, but also model and sometimes directly teach existential psychology. And so I did not have a model for doing this. I had a model of supervision, but I found it to be broadly ineffective in as much as in when I was the student, every time my supervisor told me to do something, it hurt my clients. So, I'm almost fresh out of graduate school back then, and I don't have a model for this. I have to create a shtick that complies with the ethics codes and gets the work done. And so these are my experiences doing this. Um, there we go. I won't talk much about that here today. What I want to talk about is the 6 themes that emerged over the 10 or so years that I did this work. So, number 1 is failure. A few months into supervision, a dyad that I was supervising, one of the pair asked me what to do with a client. And I demurred on this. I said, you know them best. I am literally thousands of miles away, outside your culture, outside your office, outside your legal system. You will have to decide that. Would you like to role play something? Would you like to bounce stuff off your dyadic partner here? But my student insisted, and knowing better, but ultimately being a weak man, I gave them what they wanted. I built out this level of deniability. If it were my client, in the past, I've tried this approach, and I knew that would count for nothing. I knew they would take what I said as instruction. The student went, they did what I said. It fell flat. It fell flat in the session, as it was always going to. The client was upset, and there was drama the following few sessions at their end. So the student comes back to me and she says, you told me to do this, and I did it, and it made a big mess. Why did you tell me to do this? We had 2-hour sessions to cope with the translation, and it took the whole 2 hours to work through. I think the students did very well to catch on in even that short of a period of time. I explained I hadn't told her to do anything. She demanded advice. I said, I can't really give it, but here's a thing to think about. Your risk, your evaluation. I'm sorry for even doing that. It was a little bit of a setup. And what does it mean for your expectations for you to come back on this failure? These 2 hours, they cemented our relationship. The students saw how advice must always fail. When you give advice, there are 3 possibilities, each worse than the last. 1, the client just ignores you. In that case, you're wasting your time, right? You're wasting your breath. You're wasting your client's money. Number 2, worse than that, the client takes your advice, things get worse. You get the blame. Number 3, the worst outcome of all, the client takes your advice, things get better, and you get the credit. And a dependent. They expected defensiveness. My dyad expected defensiveness, tap dancing, some exchange of blame. they got and gave, I think, a frank, honest discussion of the limitations of advice and instruction. It was so wonderful to be pushed off the pedestal, to be broken on the hard floor of reality. The next session, we were able to get to work. Thinking back on it now, this was just about 10 years ago. What really shook them was that this student came at me. She came at me angry. I'm very angry with you. That's how she opened the session. And I said, tell me more about that. I just accepted her anger. It's hers. It isn't to do with me. As such, it doesn't really affect me. I'm not frightened or offended, but curious. I'm curious about this. That's the basis for the relationship. I can't make decisions if I reject your anger. Yeah, that's also the basis for my pacifism. I've been assaulted over 100 times, and in each event, even as a child, in each event, I've endeavored to keep the attacker safe without regard to my own safety. I've come to expect this pivotal moment in therapy, in supervision, in the classroom. The day I have to apologize is the day the work gets started in earnest. I actively work these days to discredit myself, to refuse the pedestal. But of course, that's impossible. And that day always sucks. Theme number 2. When does it end? Part of my practice is in trying not to annihilate emotions. Some of our cousins in therapy treat emotions as symptoms. The client comes in anxious, and the job of the therapy is to make the emotions go away. But emotions are not external things. We are our emotions. Aggressing against them is self-aggression. My clients usually say, after we've talked about what is existential therapy and what it does and doesn't do, and I ask, what do you want? What do you want from this experience? The answer I usually get is, I'm looking for some kind of inner peace. Right? And it just is a fact that no one ever attained inner peace through self-aggression. If my job is to have unconditional positive regard for the client, and when the client comes in angry, I try to calm them down, and when they come in sad, I try to cheer them up, I am not accepting them. I'm aggressing against them. And when they try not to be anxious, that's an act of self-aggression. So my students at some point, excuse me, computers. All right. My students at some point will say, I feel anxious right now. And I will, with their permission, help them just sit in that feeling, accepting, listening, not judging. Invariably, they take that for a practice. One student saw me for a bit over a year. A month in, he reported this anxiety. We did some exercise around it. What if you tell me about that? I never ask, why are you anxious? Because I figure you know. You don't have secrets from yourself. It's not that kind of therapy. So why? It's not an interesting question to me. How are you anxious? What's it like to be anxious right now? What's it like to tell me about that anxiety? Where is it in your body? What happens when you breathe through it? So, various exercises, ways of deepening into the feeling, whatever is the feeling. Maybe put your feet flat on the floor. Take a Couple of nice deep breaths. Close your eyes if you're comfortable with that, And there, so a month in, the student reports this anxiety. We do some exercises. We repeat it just about every week. He's like, I still feel anxious. All right, let's do some more exercises. We got some really lovely, lovely revelations out of this. And this student made a proper practice out of it. Really solidified in my mind the idea of the things we're doing in therapy being practices that yield results, not because you're in the room with me, but because you take that away and you make a life out of this. But 6 months later, the student opens the session with this complaint. The more I just sit with the anxiety, the more anxious I feel. When does it end? But of course, it never ends. This is so common that it's become part of my informed consent. The point of existential therapy isn't that clients become less anxious. It's that they grow figuratively so they're able to encompass the emotion, to be big enough to be anxious and not distressed by the anxiety. When you start listening to yourself, you don't fall silent. You discover you had a lot to say. My own development has followed this path. I learned to cry in graduate school. I started having real emotional experiences. Now I cry all the time. I feel more deeply. I'm more sensitive, and that's good. But it's also quite demanding. You can tell someone that grief is love. But if the next breath is advice how to stop grieving, how to get over it, how to feel better, you are a liar. There's this wonderful scene in Ordinary People, and I assume everyone gets forced to watch this in graduate school, where Judd Hirsch tells his patient, that's the thing with feelings. If you're going to have them, don't expect them always to tickle. The more students have opened up to being with their feelings, the more intense and frequent their feelings have become. That's more or less universal. They then take these practices to their own therapy clients. Oh, they call them visitors. The word they use for the therapy goer is visitor. I think that's lovely. And now they have a way to work with those intensifying emotions. They know what it's like and how to plan for it. I guess I didn't expect this from therapists with years and sometimes decades of experience, that this would surprise them. But I guess I should have. I was a therapist after all. But the whole endeavor of therapy is getting people to have their experiences. Should be no surprise. Theme number 3, joy and sorrow. I don't use a lot of names here, but when you hear a name, it has been changed to protect the innocent. We had a retreat in the mountains. We're in Colorado, and up in the mountains where there's no cell phone service, we had a retreat. Some American therapists, some Chinese therapists. We did intense workshops during the day with good long breaks to get out into nature, hiking and climbing, and a little bit of like super tame canned fishing, And I mean, these were our visitors were folks from Beijing who like had rarely even seen a star because the sky is smoggy and light polluted and all that. So wow, it was stunning out there. One therapist, we'll call her Joy. Well, At the start, she was sorrow. She was on her way out of a tough relationship. She didn't like her body, her job, the place she lived. She gets into these workshops that are about understanding yourself, the root of yourself, the root of your practice. Some interpersonal stuff, fiction writing for self creation. That was my shtick at the time. She cried the whole time. Every workshop was a revelation. She was already broken down by life and the experience of love and care and nature and clean air and work. They shook her like a cork in a storm. So she cried constantly the whole time. She's a mess. She spends more time fixing her makeup than anything else. Yeah. So the thing's over, and she's leaving for home, and I hug her at the airport, and she's crying. Yeah. I say, like, was it worth it? Yeah. I'm sorry, it doesn't seem like you had any fun. You cried the whole time. And she goes, yeah, you're right. You're right about that. I'm glad we did this. I'll see you again. And like, I never act like I'll see you again. Double if you're heading to another country or I am. So I demurred, sure, maybe, no promises. I could be dead tomorrow. You could be. Our governments could shut down travel. Whatever. God, this was not that long before COVID. So maybe no promises, but we said all we needed to say. That also is a practice. No unfinished business. Nothing left to resolve next time. A while later, maybe 2018, we're in Hong Kong for a few days. Some of the U.S. contingent is in Hong Kong for a few days. The usual suspects. And Joy finds out. She gets word. And she takes a train 2 hours from Shenzhen to see us after work for 30 minutes. Right? 2 hours there, 2 hours back, 30 minutes at this end. She has a quick drink. I didn't recognize her. She came in. I'm like, who is that person? She lost the weight that had been displeasing her. Weight, around here, no kind of big deal. For her, it was a really big deal. Frowned at me for noticing. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. But it was important to her. She changed jobs. She was doing something that made her happy. She changed her whole appearance, found a love who treats her well. He's a really really decent guy. We've hung out. It's not perfect, but he works on it with her, and she can't ask for more than that. Her words. So she was sorrow. Now she's joy. She radiates it. She doesn't always have hedonic happiness, but she has eudaimonic happiness, joy that transcends the moment, the situation, And she cried the whole time. That's existential psychology. At least as far as I'm concerned, that's existential psychology. If you want to study empirical outcomes in existential therapy, there it is. That's your outcome measure. Not does the client subjectively rate their self as less depressed or anxious or whatever, but can they experience grief and joy both at once? Can they be overjoyed by their grief? That's not as universal as I might want it to be. But it's my ideal. My students, clients, visitors, everyone, in the beginning, they smile to hide their difficult feelings. In the end, those feelings are still present, but no longer so difficult, and they smile as they reveal them. Theme number 4. I wish my marriage were like this. One student was with me 5 years. That's absolutely extraordinary. We worked through the ethics of this together several times, periodically shifting the focus and the purpose of the work until she was finally ready to let go of the relationship in that context. About 2 years into the work, the student remarked that her marriage seemed unsatisfying in the light of this therapeutic relationship. Not that she wanted to marry me or had erotic or romantic feelings or that I did, but that the space provided in this context led to this radical honesty and acceptance and work on our relationship, our therapeutic relationship, that she didn't have in other walks of life. I like to define intimacy like this: you say how you feel, I listen and try to understand. Then you do the same for me. This student experienced this level of quite simple intimacy, was disappointed that it was special. The more we talked about it, the more I came to take her position. It is indeed sad that basic honesty and kind attention are special. I feel sad when I think about how few human beings I can trust to be both kind and authentic, honest and self honest. We spent about a month on this topic. I think, though my student didn't agree, that the things that make supervision work uh, and the things that make therapy work would make a marriage not work. Specifically, the boundaries. The visitor gets a space to try on different ways of being and experience unconditional regard. The therapist, whether a supervisor or a healer, remains very constant, relatively unchanging, non judgmental. The visitor is likely to experience more change more quickly, while the therapist likely changes more slowly over decades, over a career, rather than in weeks or months or in some mythical aha moment in a session. The visitor can have romantic or sexual feelings toward the therapist, who holds those feelings, does not exploit or return them. To do so would be transgressive, would destroy the relationship and result in harm. The relationship, the context is safe. A romance, however, must involve risk. You show yourself to a potential partner and they might reject you. And that possibility of rejection pumps up your adrenaline. That adrenaline is part of those initial feelings of infatuation that form the basis for the later romance. You know, when we talk to people about what it was like to fall in love, it's the risk. It's the chance taking, the adrenaline, the acceptance against the odds of acceptance. That's what makes it romance. That shouldn't, maybe can't happen in the context of an appropriate therapeutic relationship. And we'll wrap back around to this theme in a minute, but it's one sided. It's one sided. I must unconditionally accept you. That's how it works. Partners don't. They don't do that. And when you unconditionally accept someone who maybe is abusive, all sorts of problems. When one partner in the relationship is doing the acceptance and the other isn't, then this person is being used. The therapist, I'm being used. I'm compensated for that. You put money in my hand, you know? I get to see you grow, some other side fringe benefits, you know? The When the therapeutic relationship turns into this mutually affected, romantic, risky, sexy kind of feeling, it just destroys the context of the therapy. And the person on the downside of power, the visitor, always 100% of the time gets hurt. The visitor takes all these risks, putting their self out there. In the beginning, they probably don't trust in that unconditional regard. Why would they? So they can get that heady feeling. It's the mutuality that's missing. I'm not there for validation. The visitor's anger and disappointment don't really affect me. If I can't help you, I'll point you at a better resource. No hard feelings. I think you fundamentally don't want your other relationships to be like therapy. They wouldn't work. You can't parent like a therapist because the attachment of therapy only goes so far, and the attachment of parenting goes too far. It must do that. You can't treat your dysfunctional boss like a therapy client. You can't shouldn't have radical honesty with strangers on a bus. So it's stupid. It's stupid. Maybe the world would be better, but it's stupid that the beautiful simplicity of the therapeutic relationship isn't everywhere all the time. But I think you want the mess. Mary Ainsworth imagined a secure attachment that can be measured through the strange situation. If it's secure, it doesn't matter if the child has a lot of other insecure relationships because they have a mental model of a stable parent and a stable attachment with that model internally through which all other relationships get processed. Therapy puts the healer in that position, right? The visitor has that one relationship in their life that's safe, predictable, makes sense. That beautiful simplicity is more than a refuge, more than a respite from the vicissitudes of messy human bullshit. It's foundational to that more complicated engagement. Item 5, theme number 5 is mutuality in the end. Ooh, we went far beyond clinical supervision into mentorship, therapy. We're friends now. This student, now a friend and a person I view sometimes as my protege, stayed 5 years. 5 years. Again, that's absolutely extraordinary. This long-term relationship required something from me that usually does not occur in therapy. I always work to equalize the relationship, to slough off authority and position and help the person actualize their freedom and agency. But if the relationship is going to value ordinariness and equality, the one-sidedness of it will eventually become apparent and might become a problem. Every week, in one way or another, I'm communicating to people. Just be ordinary. Learn all the theories. Practice them on other students. Never use a technique on a client. Build yourself into someone who is helpful, and then go into the session and do nothing. Just be yourself. Be natural. Just be ordinary. But my student brings her problems. I never bring mine. She asks for advice. I never do. She asks for knowledge and I have it. I never ask her for knowledge. This is unequal. There's an inherent structure to this power dynamic. My student, my protege, started to question this right around the end of year 4. I had the usual answers. At the time, I had the usual answers. This is inherent. It's unavoidable. That's the nature of supervision, of therapy. But we were past that by then. I was wrong. I was wrong. This was about fear. Fear of censure, of hurting people, of introspection, of looking at my own feelings. We did this retreat. Met a couple times here in town. Before or after, I don't remember. I don't remember anymore. Doesn't matter. A friend demonstrated some Gestalt interpersonal work, and my protege and I, we were a team doing this. The job was London Bridge. You and your partner, put your hands together like that. Your hands, my hands, like this. Lean on each other and step back. So you're more and more leaning on each other until, if that partner wasn't there, you would be falling over, but you're leaning on them, they're leaning on you. Like you put two cards together, start a house of cards. Thing is, I occupy this body. I'm a bit over 6 feet, she's somewhat under 5 feet. Our weights are correspondingly dissimilar. I had, let's say, trepidation about putting the weight of my body into her hands. But I did. Because of a horse. The day before, my Gestalt buddy, who was leading this exercise, took us to work with horses. She made me sit on one. At the time, I was like 260, maybe 265. I've lost a little since then, still uncomfortably large. I did not want to put that on an animal. The general wisdom on the interwebs was like 2.25 is about as much as you want to put on a horse. No, the trainer, the stable owner, they had this animal, this gigantic quarter horse, and they're like, "You can take it. Don't worry about it. He's good, right? Look at him. He can carry a lot more than you." And it was true. It was true. So I had this really profound revelation on horseback, just sitting there. It was fine. It was fine. Big men sometimes struggle with this. About the time our mothers start to refuse lap time because we're too big, about the time we start getting growth spurts and stuff when we're clumsy and we don't know that we're strong and we hurt people, about the time male affection starts getting put off limits, we learn nobody can hold us. The horse held me. It was an absurd proposition that I was too big. I had to cry it out up there, surrounded by friends, by the supportive community. I had to cry it out. But then I was ready for London Bridge. I was ready for it to break me. I leaned on her. It was fine. She was strong enough. I was not too big. I was not too heavy. Yeah, it's also a metaphor. By a couple of years in, the inequality of the relationship is apparent. To keep having value, it becomes necessary to do the stuff that your teachers and your trainers are warning you not to. The really fear-based instruction, transgress the rules, go to jail, get your license suspended. Some of that stuff is necessary. Self-disclosure is the therapy word for be a person, be ordinary. The boundary has to get at least a little bit permeable, thoughtfully, but not parsimoniously permeable, not for the purpose of accomplishing a task, but for having a real relationship, which accomplishes the task. Item 6, powerlessness. I feel powerless. Mm-hmm. A year or so into supervision, nearly every student says this. If they don't, I'm worried about them. They have a case, a visitor who has a problem. The problem is at work, or it's with a family member. The student can't change it. There's nothing they can do but sit and listen while the visitor pours out their heart, cries. I feel powerless. Oh, good. Now we can get to work. To do what? Says the student. To do what? There's nothing I can do. Yes. Yeah. What a wonderful revelation. Aha! This is more of a dialectic than a paradox, you know? Irv Yalom wasn't the first to use these words, but he popularized them writing on group therapy, forming, norming, storming, performing. In the storming stage, group members try to help each other, but they don't know how. And they try to be helped, but are equally in the dark what to do with therapy. So they give each other advice. They try to solve problems. That never works. Helping isn't helping. People ignore the advice. Or worse, take it and make things worse and then blame the group. Or worst of all, remember? Worst of all, take the advice, get better, give the group credit, and then rely on them. It's only after weeks of failing and failing and failing that the group decides to wonder, what good is this? What can we really do for each other? And what do I want these people to do for me? It's then that they brainstorm, and the answer is witness. Just be there for me. Witness my story. Be engaged with me. No advice, no judgment. Thus, they make therapists of each other. I've grown convinced over the years that therapists have to learn this lesson and have to learn it the hard way through failure. Maybe it's just that I worked with therapists coming out of other modalities, still holding on to the values of those schools of thought, the delusion of grandeur, the doctors treat patients. Maybe there's a way to teach the existential therapist from the very start, so this painful lesson is avoidable, but I doubt that. Supervision was always complicated. Add in, dodgy meeting rooms, the early days of Zoom, my increasingly precarious memory. I'm literally reading to you off a script. Interpreters, cultural differences. And the job is both to maintain safety for clients, one relationship distant, and teach the therapeutic context by maintaining it. I think I mostly did that. Everyone didn't love it, as must be natural, but when inevitably this problem arose, I feel powerless. I could say, good, I'm glad you have realized it. When the student gets around to asking what they should do when they can do nothing, they have their answer. I am also powerless. I can't change your visitors or your boss any more than you can do this for your visitors. So now look back on our year together and wonder what I have done, what I have done for you. Take the best, leave the worst, adapt to your time and place. We can't change people. We can only change ourselves. I've just watched this so many times. I can't escape the conclusion. The therapist gets stuck. The visitor is on the verge of quitting. The therapist comes to group consultation, peer supervision, whatever's the context. They tell the story, and someone says, "Hey, sounds like you're having a hard time accepting something." It's something about the process, or it's something about the person. And the therapist goes, "Well, shit. That's correct." Then they go away and they change their self. Because they have changed, the relationship has to change. And because the relationship changes, the visitor changes. Because the visitor changes, their other relationships have to change. And the cascade rolls out into the world, ripples, small ones to be sure. No great dramas. Good therapy is quite boring after all. But ripples. Those are the 6 themes. Good luck out there.